Nah, you're a smart guy. He's a professor over at CUNY at CCNY. He has 3 PhDs. We got a lot to learn from this guy, so let's get right into it.
So in other words, overeducated. Yes.
Overeducated. You can never be too educated,
right? Yeah. Would you say that's even a thing to be overeducated? Right.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. The Stoics would say, yeah, there is such a thing as overeducated, because the question is, what are you going to do with your education? Presumably, you're not educating yourself just for the hell of it. You're doing it because you want to do something in the world.
Application.
Yeah, that's some kind of application. So if you keep going to school and you keep getting one degree after another, then it's like, okay, are you doing that just for its own purpose, or is there something else going on?
No practicality, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So can you tell the people exactly what you studied?
So my career started out in academia as an evolutionary biologist. And I did that for about 20-something years, and then I went through a midlife crisis, and I thought, time to do something different. So I went back to school, and I got my PhD in philosophy, because I always had an interest in philosophy since I was in high school. I grew up in Italy, and there you have to study philosophy for 3 years. So I had that interest. I had the opportunity to go back to school and get my degree. A few years later, I switched career. And initially, I was doing what is called philosophy of science, which is therefore not that far removed from what I was doing initially as a scientist. Philosophy of science is in the business of trying to understand how science works from the outside. What is the logic of scientific discoveries? How does science work? Or when it doesn't work, why it fails to work?
Is that like epistemology?
It has also certainly a component of epistemology. So philosophers of science are interested in what they refer to as the epistemic warrants for scientific discoveries. That is, if a scientist claims, let's say, that the COVID vaccine works, well, how do you know that sort of stuff? So it does get into epistemology, but it also does a little bit of history of science, sociology of science, that sort of stuff. And then a few years later, I just got into this Stoicism stuff, and this is most of what I do these days.
Yeah, that's what's up. You think, as an evolutionary biologist and then becoming a philosopher, do you think you kind of always had that longing to understand humans better and how they think, coming from that background as an evolutionary biologist? Were you always kind of focused on the human condition and what that contains?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not initially, because I was actually a plant evolutionary biologist, so it's as far as from humans as you can get. But I did always have an interest in sort of the broad conceptual questions. Even when I was in biology, even though I was running a lab and I was doing experiments, field work and stuff like that, most of the things that I was more interested in were high-level sort of conceptual questions. What does it mean to have, gene-environment interactions, which was my field of expertise? What do we mean by that? How do we go about it? That sort of thing. And once you move into from experimental to conceptual questions, now you're actually getting close to philosophy of science. So you could say that I always had an interest in the broad questions. Once I made the turn to philosophy, however, interestingly, one of the first two courses that I took in graduate school, one was in Plato, and the other one was in ethics. So both of them were very clearly focused on the human condition and what it means to be ethical, what it means to live a good life, that sort of stuff. And that really grabbed my attention.
That's cool. So as you're approaching this midlife crisis, what was your...
Yeah, I'm not over the midlife crisis, but yeah.
as you were approaching it,
yeah.
What were you seeing? What made you what was that spark of thought that had you in that crisis?
Yeah, good question. So it's not unusual, at least for academics, but I think also for more generally, to get to a certain point. In my case, it happened a little earlier than it usually does. I was in my early 40s. Typically, it happens a little later. But there are studies about this. I mean, social psychologists do study the midlife crisis kind of issue. And basically what happens, first of all, it often happens to men more than women, although it's certainly not unheard of in women. But men, especially who are focused on their career, which I certainly was, at some point you get to have done something, you're rather successful, you've done something for 20 years, and all right, is that all there is? Is that, should I be, do I really want to do this kind of thing for another 20 years or 30 years until I retire? It's time to do something different, right? The only unusual thing about my midlife crisis was that many of my colleagues who went through the same thing sort of retooled themselves, but in nearby fields. So let's say you're an evolutionary biologist, you start doing molecular biology, or you start doing ecology, or something very close, because you feel confident that your expertise is still applies largely. What was unusual in my case is that I went all the way to philosophy, which is literally across the campus at that time. I was at the University of Tennessee. I was on the other side of campus, not a science department. You go into the humanities. It's a very different way of doing things, and it's a very different way of thinking about things. But that, to me, that was exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for doing things in a very different way and sort of getting my brain to work again instead of being stuck on the same thing that I've been doing for 20 years.
And how did you come to the conclusion that Stoicism was the right choice?
That happened by chance, actually. So what happened? It's kind of an interesting story. So what happened was when I started studying philosophy as in order to get my PhD. As I said, you don't. Even though my PhD was in philosophy of science, you don't just study philosophy of science. You do ethics, you do ancient philosophy, and stuff like that. And so I thought, oh, wait a minute. I have an opportunity here to actually study ethics, and perhaps I can figure out some better way of doing things in general, not just in terms of my degree. So I started reading about practical philosophy, things like Buddhism, for instance. Right? I thought, a lot of my friends tell me that Buddhism is a cool thing, and why not give it a try and take a look. And I did, and it was interesting, but it didn't really speak to me that much. And then I discovered something called virtue ethics, which is an approach to living your life that was invented by the Greek and the Romans about 2.5 millennia ago. Think about Socrates, that kind of stuff. And I thought, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. And there too, I started by reading the obvious. I read Aristotle, I read Epicurus. Both of them were very interesting. Neither one of them kind of spoke to me. And one day I was on Twitter, now called X, as you know. And I saw this thing that said, help us celebrate Stoic Week. And I thought, the hell is Stoic Week? And why would anybody want to be a Stoic? Because, I thought, like most people do, Stoicism, that means going through life with a stiff upper lip and suppressing emotions.
Celebrating that is like kind of like...
it was a kind of it was a Stoic Week thing. So it's like live like a Stoic for a week. It's like, why would anybody want to do that? Yeah. I always pictured the Stoics as kind of Mr. Spock from Star Trek. Which, it's one of my favorite characters, as it turns out, but I don't want to live life like that. But then I thought, wait a minute, hold on. Stoicism actually is a type of virtue ethics. It's in the same general family of philosophies that I was already looking at. And then I remember, oh wait, Stoicism, that's Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, the Roman emperor. I actually read the Meditations, which he wrote back in college. And then I thought, oh, Stoicism, that's Seneca. This was a Roman senator in the 1st century. And I actually translated Seneca when I was in high school because I was taking Latin. So I thought, oh, okay, those two guys were kind of cool. So let me see. So I signed up for Stoic Week. And the very first thing that I read was some passages from one of the 2nd century Stoic philosophers, a guy named Epictetus. And boy, did he immediately speak to me. It was like, whoa, this guy's cool. He talks no nonsense. He's very clear. He doesn't beat around the bushes. He just tells you, you're doing this and this is crap, or yeah, you're doing this and this is fine. He had a very interesting sense of humor bordering on sarcasm, and that kind of also appealed to me. So that told me that Stoicism perhaps was more interesting than I thought. And so I think it was a middle of the fall semester, so we were probably late October, early November. And I thought, okay, instead of just 1 week, let me commit to study and practice Stoicism seriously until the end of the year, which I did. And then I called up a editor at the New York Times, who I knew because I worked with him before. And I said, Peter, I've been doing this weird thing. Here's a professional philosopher who tries to live like a Stoic for a couple of months. Would you be interested in an article for the Times about this? And at the time, the Times was publishing a regular online column called The Stone, as in the philosopher's stone. So I thought, maybe the readers of The Stone would be interested. And Peter said, yeah, that sounds like fun. So just send me this stuff and we'll publish it. So I sent the stuff, the column, you can find it online. It's a short, like 700 word kind of thing. It was entitled How to Be a Stoic. And then Peter calls me up the following day and he says, yeah, Massimo, I'm really glad that we published that thing because it's the most shared article on the site. And I said, oh, wow, you mean the Stone site? So I thought, and he said, no, the New York Times site. I said, what? Who the hell are all these people that are interested in Stoicism? And sure enough, I hung up with Peter and my phone, I was at the office at City College. And the phone rings and a voice says, hi, we're from Penguin. We read your article in the New York Times. Are you thinking of writing a book about this stuff? And I said, no, not really, but thanks for your interest. If I ever get to that point, I'll call you back. I hung up like an hour later. Hi, we're from Princeton Press. We read the article. Are you writing a book about this? And I thought, you're not the first person to ask me this today, but no, I don't, I'm not planning on it, but I'll let you know. The afternoon. Hi, we are from, yes, I am writing a book about this. My agent will get in touch with you. And sure enough, that's how I wrote my first book on Stoicism. It's called How to Be a Stoic, just like the columns.
I was just about to ask that. How were you living like a Stoic day to day?
That is a very good question. So there's a number of ways to do it, but fundamentally, the Stoics thought that philosophy is entirely useless unless you actually put it into practice into your day-to-day life. And so they were big on what they called, what some people later, they didn't call it that way, but some people later called spiritual exercises. It sounds very kind of mystical, kind of thing, but it really just means psychological exercises, really. But I mean, after all, the word psychology comes from psyche, which is Greek for spirit, so it's the same. It's the same thing. So basically, living like a Stoic means that you practice a series of exercises. I'll give you an example in a minute, and then you try to slowly but surely reorient your life so that you live in a better way, more conscious of what you're doing, trying to be a better person. The fundamental goal in Stoicism is to practice what is often translated as virtue, but the word virtue is a weird one these days because it's old-fashioned and it has Christian connotations. And when I say virtue, people say, "Oh, you mean your chastity and purity?" It's like, no, that's nothing to do with it. The word virtue actually comes from the Greek arete, and arete means excellence. So you're basically trying to be the best human being you can. Now, what does that mean? According to the Stoics, the best way to be a good human being is to be as reasonable as possible, as rational as possible. So to use your brain in order to solve problems in day-to-day life, and to be pro-social, that is to cooperate with other people, to be nice to other people, because we live in a society and we all depend on each other. Right? So the Stoics thought that human beings are fundamentally rational, social animals. And therefore that living in the best way a human being can possibly live means to use reason and to be pro-social, cooperative. So that's what you try to do. Now, one thing is the theory, which I just told you. Another one is the practice. Yeah, well, but what does that mean? How do I actually do it? One way to do it is to use what the Greco-Romans called the 4 cardinal virtues as kind of a moral compass. The 4 cardinal virtues are practical wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. And the idea is, so practical wisdom, the other 3 are kind of self-explanatory, right? Courage just means that you're willing to do things that might actually cause trouble or hurt you in some way, but because it's the right thing to do. Justice means treat other people right and with fairness and so on. And temperance just means doing things in good measure, in right measure, neither too much nor too little. Practical wisdom, it's a little weird. It's not a word that people actually use very much. The Greek is phronesis. Practical wisdom basically means the knowledge of good and evil. So it's knowledge of what is good to do and therefore you should do it, and what is bad to do and therefore you should not do it. It's literally a moral compass, right? Well, metaphorical, a moral compass. So to live like a Stoic means that everything you're trying to do during the day-to-day, your life has to pass the test. Is it in agreement with the 4 cardinal virtues? So is it something that is wise, courageous, just, or temperate? If the answer is no to any of these, then don't do it. Right. So now, it's not like every day you have these big opportunities to be courageous or just or anything. But in fact, if you think about it, it applies to everyday kind of interactions. Like, for instance, me being here. Right? So does it fit the test? Yeah. It seems like a good thing to do because it's helping others to understand, philosophy or especially practical philosophy. I think that's a good thing. So it passes. Yeah. So it passes the test of the practical wisdom. Is it courageous? Now it doesn't really require that much courage, but it's not a cowardly thing to do either. Well, today was snowing, so a little bit of courage. Slip on the pavement, you break your bones. Is it just? Well, so if you interact positively with the other people, you're treating them fairly as human beings, with respect, that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's just in that particular sense of the word. Is it temperate? Well, we're going to do it for an hour and a half, not the whole day, right? Or not for 5 minutes. So yeah, it passes the test.
That's really interesting because those 4 virtues are you see it like as the basis across a lot of religions. I know that I'm pretty sure the Christians took from the Stoics, but I was reading a book from this Muslim Golden Age philosopher, and he actually credits the Stoics as getting those 4 virtues absolutely correct, which I found really surprising because these Muslim philosophers tend to kind of deviate from the West, but he actually credited them as being extremely correct, which I found really interesting. But what I wanted to ask you was, seeing like how popular your article was in the Times, what do you think culturally is happening that is attracting people to this form of philosophy?
Yeah, that's another good question. I have some ideas. It's hard to say exactly because in order to really answer that question, you would need a sociological study. Right? You need somebody who does. If you know anybody who's interested in doing a sociology thesis on the rise of Stoicism, I'd be happy to be on the panel that advises that kind of thesis. So as far as I know, nobody's actually done any systematic studies. But you can guess there are a few reasons. Stoicism has been increasingly popular over the last 20 years or so. You can actually check on Google Ngram. You can see the word Stoicism going up, especially over the last 20 years. So what has happened? Well, a number of things. First of all, increasingly a number of people move away from mainstream religion. That's a fact, especially in the West, at least, and especially in the United States. So the number of people who recognize themselves as mainstream Christians, Muslims, or Jews is going down. But that doesn't mean that those people don't need some kind of structure in their life, some kind of general idea of how to, behave and navigate the world and that sort of stuff. So they look at alternatives. That explains not just Stoicism, but also a resurgence of interest in Buddhism, a resurgence of interest in Sakya humanism, which is another philosophy that has been sort of going up, existentialism. There's a number of these things that have gone up over the last several years. So that's one reason, I think. A second reason is, as you were just mentioning, Stoic ideas have actually never gone away. They just transformed. I mean, Stoicism as an independent school of thought ended around the 2nd or 3rd century of the current era, but it influenced Christianity, it influenced Islam, and therefore, Thomas Aquinas, for instance, arguably the leading, most important Christian theologian of all times, but certainly of the Middle Ages. He was the one that articulated the 7 Christian virtues, and those 7 are just the four that I mentioned, the Stoic ones, plus hope, faith, and charity, which are more specifically Christian. So he basically incorporated a large chunk of Stoicism into Christianity. You probably have heard of the Serenity Prayer, which is something that is invoked at the beginning of meetings of 12-step organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That's a 20th century Christian prayer, and it goes something like this. It says, it asks God to help me tell the difference between what I can change and what I cannot change, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom, the fortitude to accept what I cannot, and then the wisdom to tell the difference. Well, that concept actually is a Stoic concept. It goes back to Epictetus in the 2nd century, and Christianity again took it over and rearranged it. So part of the answer to your question is, well, Stoicism has actually never gone away. It's kind of permeated our culture from below. A third reason is the onset of social media. As much as I have a good number of misgivings about social media, in fact, I kind of quit all of that stuff a couple of years ago because I think on balance they're being actually pretty bad for humanity. Nevertheless, certainly now that people are on the internet and people can look up things and connect with people who have similar interests much more easily than it would have been before the onset of internet and social media. So today, people are interested who are interested in ancient philosophy or in Stoicism can just get on and look up things and find local groups, find online forums, find lots of resources that they can use. So that makes it easier. And then another reason is the fact that some people really literally sat around the table about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and said these were a mixed group of philosophers and psychologists, and they thought they literally sat around a table in London, and you can actually find on YouTube the video of that meeting, and they said, hey, this Stoicism stuff, this is really helpful, this is very good. Why don't we actually try to do something about making people know about it? And that's how Stoic Week started out. That's how the annual meeting of people interested in Stoicism, which is called Stoicon, started out. This was a concerted effort by a small number of people that eventually grew to a sort of international organization. So it's a combination of factors, some of which are kind of on purpose. And there's one more important factor. Stoicism back in the 1950s and early 60s was the inspiration for the origin of cognitive behavioral therapy. The early psychologists who developed CBT, as it's called, were actually inspired by the Stoics. And CBT is arguably the most successful, certainly one of the most successful evidence-based type of psychotherapy. And so that also helps because it means that Stoic practices, the spiritual exercises that I was talking about earlier, actually have the backing of science. So we know that some of this stuff really does work. There is empirical evidence. It's not just somebody saying so.
So psychologists integrating Stoic practices into like their therapy and stuff like that benefited the people they were like treating and stuff?
Yes, exactly. Now, CBT, of course, is a type of therapy, so it's not a philosophy, which means that it applies typically only to specific problems. So, for instance, let's say, you suffer from some kind of phobia, or some kind of, or you're depressed, or you are anxious or something, then you go to a CBT practitioner, and the practitioner uses essentially Stoic techniques, improved and modified with the help of modern science, to try to address specifically that problem, right? But now, once you've done that, typically CBT sessions don't last that long. We used to think of psychotherapy as, you go into the couch and you sit down and then you do that for decades. With CBT, you actually only do it for a few weeks or a few months at most. If there is improvement, great. If it doesn't work, then the therapist will say, you need to try something else. So these things are short. But once you're done with those, once your specific problem has been addressed, then you still have, I would guess, to more general issues, then you need to think about, what do I want to do in life? What are my values? Why are certain things important or not important? That sort of stuff. That's where Stoicism as a philosophy comes in. It's one way. It's certainly not the only way, but it's one way to really give you a framework in life that helps you make decisions, prioritize things, and it kind of makes you feel more connected to other people. It makes you feel like you're actually doing something that is relevant.
Mm-hmm. So in what ways is following a philosophy similar and different from following a religion?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I don't think that there is a hell of a difference between philosophies of life and religions. There are some differences. Typically, philosophies of life like Stoicism, existentialism, and so on, they put the emphasis on arguments for why you should do certain things as opposed to revelation or faith, right, which is more typical of religion. Although even there, the distinction is not that sharp because a lot of religions practice what's called apologetics, that is, argument-based defense of their positions. Right. Thomas Aquinas, whom I mentioned earlier, was one of the Christian apologists. He said, he actually developed arguments. He wrote down arguments for why you should believe in God and why you should be following certain, rules of conduct, etc., etc. But ultimately, for a religious person, the faith, scripture-based stuff trumps the arguments. Right? If your arguments are only go up to a point, and then after that there is revelation and faith. In the case of a philosophy like Stoicism or existentialism, usually faith doesn't really play a role. It's all argument-based. It's all based on, okay, let's talk about this stuff. So that is one difference. But fundamentally, other than that, they're very similar. In fact, I tend to think of religions as a subset of philosophies of life. As far as I can tell, philosophies of life and religions to get both have typically three components. They have a metaphysics, meaning an account of how the world works. They have a ethics, which is an account of how you should behave in the world. And then they have a set of practices, which are meant to help the believer or the philosopher, the practitioner, to actually behave in a certain way in the world. So let me give you examples. So sort of let's say if we're talking about Christianity and Stoicism, right? In the case of Christianity, the metaphysics has to do with a creator God that exists outside of the universe, got everything started, has a plan for us, etc., etc. That's the metaphysics. In the case of Stoicism, the metaphysics says that the universe works by cause and effect, and it's made of matter, and that sort of stuff. In terms of ethics, in Christianity, you follow the Ten Commandments, you follow the teaching of Jesus, that sort of thing. In the case of Stoicism, you follow the 4 cardinal virtues, that sort of stuff. And then in terms of practices, if you're a Christian, you go to church, you read scriptures, you listen to sermons, you pray. If you're a Stoic, you do the spiritual exercise that I mentioned now multiple times. So let me give you a couple of examples of what these are. One standard exercise is called philosophical journaling. Basically, what you do is, ideally every day, but at least several times a week, you take a few minutes before you go to bed, and you go over major events in your day. And you ask yourself, how did I do? Did I make mistakes? Did I get things right? And you want to learn. The idea is to learn from your mistakes. You write it down and you say, oh, okay, I didn't handle this particularly well, so let me make a mental note for the future. You also want to pay attention to things you did right, because you want to reinforce that kind of behavior in yourself. And then you ask yourself, what could I have done differently? Is the next time that something like that happens, maybe I made a mistake today, maybe I didn't handle it well today. How can I do better the next time around? So it's it's journaling meant to be helpful for self-improvement, that sort of stuff. Other exercises are more physical. For instance, there are multiple ways to exercise temperance. We all have I don't want to talk about you guys, but a lot of people have a problem with temperance. It's hard, especially in today's society, to do things in right measure. We tend to exaggerate. We tend to do too much. We eat too much. We drink too much. We watch too much TV. We do all sorts of stuff too much. We get upset too much. That sort of stuff. So how do you exercise temperance? Well, there are a number of ways. One of which is simply, for instance, in my case, I pick 1 or 2 days a week and I abstain from alcohol for those days. I'm Italian, so I usually have wine at dinner, right? But once or twice a week, I say, okay, this is the day when I'm not doing it. I'm just not do that. Other ways to exercise temperance are just exercise. I don't like exercising, but I tell myself, well, that actually is a way to practice your temperance. You're not just doing the exercise. You're not just improving hopefully your aerobic capacity or whatever it is. You're actually working on your willpower, in a sense, right? Because working on temperance means working on your willpower. So that kind of stuff, and those are the Stoic equivalent of practices in Christianity. So that's the way it works. So I don't, in order to go back to your question, I don't think there is a hell of a difference between religions and philosophies of life.
Speaking metaphysically, is there like a distinction between determinism and free will in Stoicism?
Yeah, there is. So free will, it's a kind of a funny phrase. You don't find it actually in the ancient writings. That's a Christian invention. It came later during the Middle Ages. But yes, the Stoics did address the issue, even though they didn't use the term. So the Stoics were determinists. So in other words, they believed that everything that happens in the world is the result of cause and effect. Right? So if I bang on the table, you hear the noise. You hear the noise because I banged on the table. The table isn't going to bang by itself. You're not going to hear the noise by itself without any cause. It's always cause, effect. Well, if that's the case, and that applies to everything, not just to tables and noises, but also to human behavior, then what about free will? What about our ability to make decisions? That sort of stuff. So the Stoics were what modern philosophers call compatibilists about free will, meaning that they were determinists, and yet they thought that there is an interesting way in which human beings actually do make decisions, and our decisions are our own decisions. We're responsible for them. And the way it works is this. If everything is the result of cause and effect, some of these causes are external to me, but some of them are internal to me. That is, I actually generate some of my own causes. My brain, for instance, is a cause-generating machine, in a sense. I make decisions in response to certain stimuli, right? So, for instance, let's say that I'm at home, I'm writing on my laptop, and all of a sudden I feel thirsty. Then I have to decide, do I want to stop now to take a pause and go to the refrigerator? Yeah, that's probably a good idea, because if I'm thirsty, it's a good idea. I go to the refrigerator, I have a choice. There is water and there is beer. Beer is more attractive than the water. But at the same time, I'm working. So perhaps drinking beer right now, it's not the best possible idea. All of these are decisions. And these are decisions that I am making. Nobody else is making them for me. I'm not being forced to get up and go to the refrigerator. I'm not being forced to pick the water over the beer or vice versa, right? So in that sense, the Stoics said, yeah, all of this is the result of cause and effect. After all, why did I get up to go to the refrigerator? Because I'm thirsty. Or why am I thirsty? I don't know, because probably I haven't drunk for a while. There is, the room may be, the temperature may be a little high, so that it causes, dehydration. It's all physical, chemical, biological causes. There is nothing, outside of that. Nevertheless, you can tell that it was my decision to get up, because I could have done otherwise. I could have said, no, I'm staying, I'm finishing. It's my decision to pick one drink rather than another, and so on and so forth. And that's because internally, what we do, what evolution has shaped us to do, is to make decisions. So think of human beings, in particular human brains, as highly sophisticated decision-making machines. And if the decision comes from me, from my internal mechanism, then it's mine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not free, meaning that, because what does free mean here? If by free one means, as the Christians usually do, not caused, then that's magic. I mean, if all of a sudden this thing started floating in midair and there was nothing pull it, nothing pick it up, that's magic, right? But we don't believe in magic. Stoics don't believe in magic. So everything has a cause. Even if I see something that might be puzzling, I all of a sudden see this thing actually floating, I know that has to be a cause. Right? Maybe somebody's pulling on a thread that is transparent or something like that. But there has to be a cause. I don't believe that things happen without a cause. But some of these causes originate from within me. And that's where will, they don't use the word free will, as I said, but they do use the word volition, which is the term that psychologists actually use when they talk about these things. So we have volition, and our volition is ours. If I decide to raise my hand at this point, right, this is my own volition. If you push my hands up, that's not my volition. That's a response to an external cause. So you pushing my hand up is an external cause. I raising my hand is my internal cause. It's still cause. There's still causality going on.
I see. That's interesting.
I have a question. So, prior to being Stoic, were you involved in any other religion or philosophy?
Yes. So I grew up as a Catholic. Because I grew up in Rome, literally not far from the Pope, not far from the Vatican. So kind of by default, although my family is not very religious, but nevertheless, kind of by default, I was a Catholic. I left the church when I was a teenager for a number of reasons. I was talking to my priest that I was in contact with, and I started asking uncomfortable questions. So I say, so explain to me this Trinity thing. How is it possible that God is one and at the same time is three? I said, this was, I was a teenager, I was in high school. Remember, I was studying philosophy in high school, right? So I said, that violates one of the fundamental principles of logic, the principle of non-contradiction. Something cannot be A and not A. It cannot be 1 and 3. And the priest's response was very unsatisfactory. He said, this is a mystery of faith. It's like, well, that's a cop-out. You're not telling me anything. What do you mean? I said, okay, let's try something else. Let's try transubstantiation, which is a specifically Catholic doctrine that says that when you go and have communion in church, they give you the little holy wafer and then the wine. They actually use wine. In a lot of places in the United States use grape juice. That's actually wine. Okay, great. So I said, so these are meant to be representing the body and the blood of Christ, right? And the priest says, no, they literally are the body and the blood of Christ. I said, really? Because that doesn't, I don't know what flesh tastes like, but that tastes like a wafer to me. And I know what blood tastes because occasionally I cut myself and stuff like that. That's not blood. That's just wine. And he said, mystery of faith. And it's like, okay, that's not good enough.
So that's what deterred you away from.
That turned me away. It's like I'm sorry, you're just not giving me answers to very basic, I would think, straightforward questions. I just want to make sense of what you're telling me. And if you're telling me, I don't basically, mystery of faith just means I don't know. I have no idea how this works. So that kind of started me out on a quest for looking for something else. And I landed pretty quickly on an approach that I already mentioned. It's called secular humanism. So secular humanism comes out of a long list of philosophers, beginning perhaps with Bertrand Russell, British philosopher of the early part of the 20th century, who incidentally wrote a book called Why I'm Not a Christian, which I read when I was in high school. I was like, this guy's actually interesting. And then there are contemporary secular humanists. At the time when all this was happening, Two of the major ones were Carl Sagan, who was an astronomer here in the United States, and they had a big influence on me because I actually was interested in astronomy when I was young, so I knew who he was, and then I discovered that he was also a secular humanist. I said, oh, that's an interesting combination. Here's somebody who I admire because of his science, but as it turns out, he also sort of approaches things philosophically from a different perspective. A guy named Paul Kurtz, who died a few years ago, he was a philosopher at SUNY Buffalo, and he studied out an organization called the Council for Secular Humanism, which really develops and sort of popularizes the philosophy. So, there were resources out there. So I started reading these guys. Later on, I actually get to meet Paul Kurtz. Never met Carl Sagan, unfortunately. He died too young. So there were resources. Now, for a long time, therefore, for like 20, 30 years, I considered myself a secular humanist. Then the problem was that secular humanism turned out not to be very practical when I started having actual problems. Yes, as your life is going well, you don't really need much of a philosophy, or at least, well, let me take that back. Actually, I think you do, but you don't realize it. You don't put the philosophy to the test because things are going fine. But then when I hit my 40s, the famous midlife crisis, not only I was starting to look for something different to do, I also was hit by a couple of things. My father died fairly suddenly. I was hit by a divorce that I did not expect. My wife filed for divorce without actually me having any idea that this was happening, that there was any problem. And that happened pretty much the same time, within a span of a few months. And so I thought, okay, so what kind of resources does secular humanism have to help me go through this kind of stuff? And the answer was, not much, as it turns out, because secular humanism is about broad ideas. It's about human rights, which I certainly agree with, but that doesn't help me with a divorce, right, or it doesn't help me when my father dies. I cannot invoke human rights. Secular humanism has to do with support for science and reason. Great, I'm a scientist, I support science and reason. But again, when it comes to a specific problem, what does that tell me? How am I supposed to actually apply this? And that's what led me to start looking for something else, and eventually, as we were saying earlier, I landed on Stoicism.
So seeing that you saw contradictions in Christianity, do you think there's any flaws within Stoicism?
Oh, there are flaws everywhere. These are all human creations as far as I'm concerned, both religions and philosophies, and humans are fallible. So yes, there are. I can actually point out a couple. So for one thing, Stoicism started out about 2,400 years ago, at the end of the 4th century, before the current era. And so, more than 2,000 years later, you think, okay, surely they got something wrong. And sure enough, they did, especially in terms of metaphysics. They did certainly get something wrong, I think. For instance, the ancient Stoics thought that, in terms of metaphysics, they thought that the universe itself is a living organism, endowed with what they call the logos, which basically means reason. Well, I'm a scientist in the 21st century. I don't believe that the universe is a living organism endowed with reason. The universe is a set of processes that follow what we call natural laws. So they were wrong on that one. Now, you would think, okay, so what? Just change that with modern physics, not a problem. But the problem is that there actually are connections, typically, both in philosophies and in religions, between the metaphysics and the ethics. And the ethics is what really matters at the end of the day, right? You want to behave in certain ways. For instance, ancient metaphysics, Stoic metaphysics, led to an understanding of providence. Basically, the Stoics thought, hey, the universe itself is a living organism. That means we're literally bits and pieces of the universe, right? So whatever happens to us is for the good of the universe, of the body. That sounds great. That's a great idea, right? That makes sense of your life. That means that when bad stuff is happening to you, you can find consolation and acceptance in the notion that, well, this is bad for me, but hey, the universe is actually better off. Think of it this way. Imagine you are a cell of a living body, right? Well, the cell might at some point die. In fact, it might have to die, otherwise it becomes a cancer, right? From the point of view of the cell, that's not that good, right? I have to die. Oh, crap, right? But then you can tell yourself, but wait a minute, the fact that I'm dying here actually is good for the whole body. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is something really that makes sense of my entire existence. That's great. But if you take out the notion of a living universe, then that kind of reasoning goes out the window, right? Now you have to replace it with something else. So yeah, there are things in Stoicism in the ancient Stoicism that don't work, and that's why a number of people these days are working toward sort of changing and updating the philosophy.
So do you think there is such thing as a perfect philosophy?
I don't even know what that would look like.
Like, why follow Stoicism instead of something like nihilism or existentialism?
Or like, what questions would a philosophy have to answer for you to consider it complete? Like, is there any question that you really wish you had the answer to that is just not addressed by any philosophy?
Oh, I think a lot of philosophies are complete in that sense. I mean, Stoicism is a complete system. It has answers for every question. The question is, the issue is,
do you like the answers?
Are they, well, not just whether I like them or not, but are they the right answers? Some of them might not be the right answers. So no, I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect philosophy. There certainly are complete philosophies. There are coherent philosophies and not so coherent ones. When you want a system that is coherent, meaning that it doesn't have internal contradictions. If it has contradictions, then it's problematic. Then there is something that is not working well. And you want something that works. Works in the sense of actually helping you navigate your life in a better way. So in answer to your question of, what about nihilism or other approaches, I think that some philosophies do work. I don't think Stoicism is the philosophy. I think that several philosophies and religions work well enough, and it's perfectly fine if one picks one or the other. Stoicism works for me and for a number of other people. Buddhism works well for other people. Existentialism works. I have friends who follow, take an existentialist look. Nihilism, not so much. I think there are philosophies that don't work very well. And the reason for that is because nihilism tends to be, for instance, antisocial. If you're a nihilist, you don't give a crap about anything and anybody.
It's lame.
Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, fine. So nothing matters, fine. Then just why don't you commit suicide? It's like if nothing matters, why you stick around? So some philosophies I think are actually not very good, and the same goes for religions, right? So some of them actually do help people live a better life, both as individuals and as members of a society, and others are not so much.
Do you think philosophy in general leads to more questions or answers?
Ideally, it leads to more questions. That is one of the differences between philosophies and religions. Religions tend to be heavy on answers, although sometimes the answers are, it's a mystery of faith. But nevertheless, that's an answer. Yeah, philosophies, at least ideally, generate discussions. They help you think about stuff. They don't give you answers necessarily. They just give you a general framework that helps you find your own answers. So for instance, take again the case of Stoicism. I said that I try to live according to the 4 cardinal virtues, but that's only a framework. It doesn't the philosophy itself doesn't tell me specifically in any particular situation, how to act. That's up to me. I have to interpret the general framework and ask myself, is this thing wise, courageous, just, and temperate? I might be wrong in interpreting it in a specific case, right? It might be that I tell myself, this passes the test, and then somebody else says, are you sure? Because actually, as it turns out, you didn't think about it that way. We are not sages. The sage is the ideal human being who never gets things wrong. I don't think there are any such thing as sages.
Doesn't exist.
No.
Mm-hmm. I want to transition a little bit. So
sure.
You work at City College, and Uptown Manhattan it's a very interesting place on earth because it has some of the most poverty-stricken people in proximity to some of the wealthiest people.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, like, what does Stoicism give us, or what tools can philosophy give us to creating a more like equitable society?
Excellent question. So the Stoics tend to be, well, actually, they don't tend to be, they are cosmopolitan, meaning that they think that all of humanity is just one big family where we're all uncles and brothers and sisters and whatever it is, and that we should act accordingly. So it doesn't matter if somebody's from your neighborhood or from the other side of the world. It doesn't matter whether somebody's a man or a woman or any other gender. Nothing matters. It doesn't matter what their ethnicity is. It doesn't matter what their nationality certainly is. You ought to treat them as if they were your brothers and sisters. So that is a blueprint for a cosmopolitan society. A cosmopolitan society is a just society because you have no reason to treat people in a differential way. Right? Everybody should have the same kind of opportunities. Everybody should have the same kind of access to resources and things like that. Of course, that's the ideal, right? But you do need an ideal. If you don't have an ideal, the ideal is the end point, right? If you don't have an end point in mind, then you don't know where you're going. Now, from a practical perspective, for instance, that means that Stoics are in favor of abolishing national boundaries.
So
right?
no borders.
No borders, right? Now, that doesn't mean overnight, because Stoics tend to be very practical. And so they realize that if you did that overnight, it would be chaos. It would be just like, it'd be not a good situation. But again, ideally, that's where you want to go. And so Stoics would, for instance, favor broader and broader coalition of states, like the European Union, for instance. That is a project that a Stoic can get on board. If you travel through Europe, I have occasionally travel with some friends, or more often with my wife, who is American, and they're always surprised because we moved from Italy to France to Germany, and they never asked a passport.
No problem.
Right? There's no problem. It's like going from Alabama to Georgia. It doesn't matter, right? That's what ideally a Stoic would want globally. And so a Stoic, so in terms of practical political things, as a Stoic, I favor every kind of project along those lines. So I'm very much in favor of the European Union, and I don't like, on the other hand, I'm against nationalistic kind of projects. When I see people saying, no, we need to curve our little independent state because we don't like those people and we want to do things differently, I think to myself, that's a step in the wrong direction. So there is a general, so that's just an example of how there is a general ideal, cosmopolitanism. We're not there, and we're likely not going to get there for some time. However, there is also very clear political steps you take. So that means, if you're a cosmopolitan, that means you're in favor of eventually abolishing national boundaries, which means you're in favor of all sorts of policies, not only institutions like the European Union, but for instance, having more and more lax immigration laws, right? That sort of stuff. You should, from a cosmopolitan perspective, you should make immigration as easy as possible. Again, you're not being naive. You understand that right now there are complications, there are limits to these kind of things. It has to be done, gradually by steps. But I'm in favor of as broad and as easy immigration laws as possible, for instance.
I feel like that process would take a very long time, especially here.
That is true, but I do believe I'm a little bit of an optimist in the long term. About things. In the short term, I'm a pessimist. I think, for instance, that the United States is facing a really horrible electoral choice at the presidential elections coming up in a few months. So in the immediate, I'm not very optimistic. But I think in the long run, we have made some progress. I can give you examples of what I think are clear examples of moral progress. For instance, the abolition of slavery. Right. Slavery was universal in the ancient world. Right? Any empire, not just the Romans and the Greeks, but the Chinese, and the Egyptians, everybody, the Mayans, anybody everywhere had slaves. All the world economy basically ran on slavery. eventually we abolished it. It's not there anymore. There are, complications,
pockets,
there are
right.
pockets, but by and large, you don't see people going around defending slavery, and certainly you don't see governments going around defending slavery. So that to me is an example of clear progress. It took thousands of years, literally thousands of years, right? But it's progress. More recently, we have progress over, enfranchisement of more and more people, right? Women's vote, first at the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, we tend to forget, but women in the United States only got the vote almost 100 years ago.
It's crazy.
Less than 100 years, 1925. Wow. So it's like, that's crazy. We take it for granted these days, but it's pretty crazy. And of course, other minorities have achieved progress even more recently, right? I mean, I have actually seen with my own eyes, let's say LGBTQ minority, status going from no way this is ever going to happen to it's pretty normal. There are major pockets of resistance, as you know, but it's happened. Legislation has been passed at a federal level, and as well as at the level of several states, that was unthinkable 20 years ago, right? So I think that's progress. Now, unfortunately, unlike Martin Luther King, I don't believe that the moral arc of the universe goes anywhere. It doesn't bend anywhere. He says famously that it bends toward justice. I don't think there is a moral arc of the universe. Morality is something that we do. The universe doesn't have anything to do with it. The universe doesn't care about it. It's up to us, which means that we can slide back. We can make progress, and then we can lose progress if we're not careful. The overturning of Roe v. Wade, in my mind, counts as an example of sliding back. Okay. Of course, plenty of people disagree with that. They think it's progress, but we're talking about my opinion in this case. So here, that is my opinion. And there are attempts now at reversing, of course, the progress that's been made by LGBTQ. So these things, if you're not careful, we slide back, and that is why it's a constant effort and a constant battle. But I do think that there has been overall moral progress, and yes, it does take a long time.
And with that being said, do you think feelings of prejudice are innate to humans?
Yeah, which is why we need to overcome them by a willful effort. Let me give you an example. So I'm an evolutionary biologist, and even though I was working on plants when I was actually doing the thing, I've always been interested also obviously in human evolution. And I think xenophobia, for instance, is a natural instinct. People are naturally distrustful of anybody that comes from the outside, especially if they look different from what they look. Very likely, this evolved by natural selection because it was adaptive back in the Pleistocene, 200, 300, 400,000 years ago. Because we know that for most of human history, human beings have lived in small bands of 60 to 100 individuals, most of whom were related to each other. They were each other's, uncles and nieces and brothers and sisters. That meant that if somebody were to come from the outside, probably was trouble. This was probably not a good thing. So it makes sense to me that natural selection evolved an innate response of xenophobia. But we can overcome it. We know that. I mean, there are all sorts of things that we overcome. Sometimes factually fairly easily. I mean, remember, go back to my example of getting thirsty and wanting a beer. I can override that. I can say, that's being thirsty is one of the strongest things, or hungry. It's one of the strongest natural feelings you can have. Much stronger than things like xenophobia, because your survival depends on it, right? But I can say, okay, this is not the time to drink, or this is not the time to eat, right? I can certainly override. I can use my mind and say, no, this is not a good thing. And so religions at their best, and philosophies of life at their best, one of the things they do is they teach us to overcome that to essentially reframe our thinking. So when I say Stoicism is a cosmopolitan philosophy, what that means is that one of the things the Stoics work toward is overcoming xenophobia, overcoming any kind of whether it's, the fact that it's natural, which it is, it's irrelevant. There's all sorts of natural things that are bad for you. So xenophobia being one of them, or which xenophobia brings also racism and that sort of stuff. Although racism, as we understand it today, it's actually a fairly recent invention. I don't think we're instinctively racist. We're instinctively xenophobic, but not racist because the very concept of race is rather recent. It's basically an invention of the last 200 or 300 years. Before that, the Greek and Romans did not look at people in terms of race. They looked at people in terms of either you're a member of my society or you're a barbarian. You're outside, right? But barbarian literally means this comes from a Greek term, and the word barbarian comes from the fact that to the Greeks, anybody who was not speaking Greek sounded like they were saying blah 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 blah. So barbarian is simply somebody who doesn't speak Greek, essentially, for all effective purpose. And they didn't see. So, for instance, let me give you one interesting example is slavery. As I said, slavery was universal at the time, but it was actually a very different kind of slavery, based on a very different kind of concept from what we tend to discuss. We tend to think about slavery as a colonialism issue, which it is. But colonial times, remember, we're talking about, again, the last 200 or 300 years, so it's pretty recent, give or take. Racism in the colonial sense of the term comes out of a conviction that certain people are actually inferior. Remember even the U.S. Constitution initially said that black people are only 2/3 of a human being. Well, that clearly says that they didn't think that everybody was created equal, despite the fact that the preamble to the Declaration of Independence says we're all created. No, we're not. Clearly there was this understanding that people that look different from me are inferior, and therefore they deserve to be enslaved to me. In fact, they're even better off to be enslaved, because I can help them, I can, they're not capable of living their own lives normally, so I'm going to be helpful. Very convenient, obviously, but the ancients didn't think about it that way at all. Anybody could become a slave. You became a slave because you lost a battle. So, and you were raided, and that's it. Then you were put to work by the winners. And anybody could lose a battle, right? The Greeks lost, for instance, the Athenians lost a major battle against the Syracusans, who were also Greek, in Sicily, and 20,000 of them became slaves. The Romans lost, even though they're a very powerful empire, they lost their own battles, and when they did, Roman citizens were actually, made slaves by other people. So there wasn't this notion of inferiority. You were not inferior because you were enslaved. You just got unlucky. You just lost the battle. Now, of course, once you were a slave, you can also, your children would become slaves automatically, right? But again, that was a matter of bad luck. They just happened to be born to somebody who had lost a battle. And also, slaves could be enfranchised, meaning that, in Rome especially, there was a tendency for people to give freedom to their slaves, precisely because they were considered normal human beings. And if you work for me as a slave for 20 years or 30 years or something like that, and you're bright and independent person, sure, at some point I'll give you the freedom. None of that is right from the point of view of morality. It was still a horrible idea, but it's very different as a concept from colonial type slavery. I think colonial type slavery is even worse, if anything, right? Because in both cases you're taking another human being and you're depriving him or her of basic rights. That's awful no matter what. But at least in the first case, in the ancient Greek and Roman case, it happened because of bad luck, as opposed
colonial, it just involves some type of hate now, just racism.
Yeah. So it's different, and it's been there for a long time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, what are some specific insights that you could give someone that's trying to improve the social welfare of their own community? and trying to, let's say they come from a deprived neighborhood, or, they just don't have as much opportunity and they're trying to get ahead in life. What are some specific gems of philosophy that you could give them to kind of help them on their journey?
So, part of the problem here is that the specifics do depend on the situation on the ground, right? So it's hard to give a general advice to somebody because the answers are going to depend on who that person is, what their resources are, what their community is, and what the opportunities might or may not be available, etc., etc. So giving specific advice is something you can do, but only once you know enough about the specifics. However, there is.
I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
I would just say it's more about like, what should they do internally for their character?
Right. Yeah. So there is some advice you can give. On the other hand, in terms of sort of way of looking at things. In my mind, the single most useful piece of advice that comes from Stoicism, I've actually already mentioned it when I mentioned the Serenity Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
That piece of advice, in fact, as I said, comes from Stoicism. It's applied by Christianity. You find it in Judaism, and you also find it in Buddhism, which means that there's lots of people around the world that kind of recognize that this is a good idea. The Stoics refer to it as the fundamental rule, and it comes from Epictetus, a 2nd century Stoic who incidentally was a slave. He grew up in fact, the name, we don't know his real name. The name Epictetus just means acquired, because he was bought. We don't actually know what his real name was. He was from what we today refer to as Western Turkey, and then it was brought to Rome. Eventually he was given his freedom and he started teaching. He studied and then started teaching Stoic philosophy. And he actually became one of the most successful and famous teachers of the 2nd century. Epictetus talks to his students. We have a couple of his books. And in his books, he talks to his students about what he calls the fundamental rule. And basically says, look, everything you do, no matter what it is, remember, some things are up to you, other things are not up to you. And a good life is the result of focusing where your agency lies, in other words, what you can actually do, and at the same time developing an attitude of equanimity and acceptance for the things that you do not control, that are not in fact up to you. So every time you face something, always ask yourself, what here now is up to me and what is not up to me? Let me give you an example, again, using this conversation we're having. So walking, I do interviews and conversations like this all the time. Every time that I do that, I walk into a place and I remind myself, okay, what here is up to me? What's up to me is to be as focused as possible when you guys are asking me questions. Actually pay attention, not looking at my phone or not staring out of the window, that sort of stuff, or not daydreaming. Be focused. Trying to be as clear as I can be. Try to be as helpful in terms of using actual examples and stuff like that. Those things are up to me. What is not up to me is the kinds of questions you're going to ask me. I have no idea, right? For walking here, I had a vague idea, but not really, right? What is not up to me is how the whole thing is going. The conversation may be going well or may not be going well. That depends on the interaction between us, which is not entirely up to me. I can only control my side of the equation, certainly not yours, right? Ideally, I would like this thing that's being recorded and eventually is going to be published and all that sort of stuff to be seen by a lot of people and a lot of people to think about. But that's not up to me, right? It's all I can do is all that really is up to me is my performance, so to speak, my focus, my attention to what is happening, and so on and so forth. So, the idea that Epictetus is developing, therefore, is that this applies to everything. Everything you want to do, a job interview, an exam at school, a relationship with your loved ones, or trying to make a difference in your community. Everything. It really literally applies from the small things to the big ones. In every case, there's always a distinction between what's up to you and what's not up to you. And according to Epictetus, the mistake that we always make, that we often make, is to focus on what is not actually up to us. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, let me give you an example. Let's say you go out for a job interview. Right? What comes natural if you're preparing for a job interview is to be concerned about whether you're going to get the job or not. Right? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, after all, that's why you're doing the interview in the first place. You want the job. But of course, Epictetus would say, getting the job, it's not up to you. Right? It depends on the interviewer. It depends on the competition that you have. You know, who else is applying for a job. It depends on even the psychological state of the interviewer. Like, you know, did he get up in the morning and, you know, maybe he was upset with his wife, and so now he's going to be nasty while asking questions to you, but maybe he's not going to be nasty later to somebody else, and so your interview is going to go badly with no fault of your own. Right? What can you then do? Where should you focus? Well, preparing for the interview as well as possible. That is up to you, right? So doing your research about, you know, what company it is, and et cetera, et cetera. Decide that it's a good idea to try to get a good night's sleep before the interview, because that way you're going to be refreshed. Mm-hmm. Now notice, you can decide that it's a good idea to have a good night's sleep. You cannot decide, it's not up to you whether you actually have a good night's sleep. Mm-hmm. Because maybe there's going to be, you know, a party around the corner and, you know, until 5 o'clock in the morning, and you're not going to be able to sleep. So what is up to you is your decision that I need to do whatever it is possible to get a good night's sleep. Mm-hmm. Whether you actually get a good night's sleep, it's not up to you. What is up to you is the idea that you should be trying to show up on time for the interview, right? But whether you actually show up on time, that's not up to you. Maybe it snows and the subways are blocked, or they're delayed, or, you know, you can't, so you get up plenty of time, but you're still going to be late for the interview. That sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Once you start getting into this way of thinking about things, it really applies to everything, and you feel like you are much more in control, precisely because you're focused on the things that you actually can do, as opposed to what we typically do, being worried about the kind of stuff that we can't actually do anything about.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's very important to you know, just focus on what you can, and disregard what you can't.
I feel like sometimes though it's human instinct maybe to like focus, like for instance in your example about the job interview, like it would be human instinct to like focus on the fact that, oh, like I hope I get the job and stuff like that, you know.
But all that does is take away from like what you can do.
Right.
So.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly. You get upset,
right,
or you get unfocused because you're actually paying attention to the wrong things.
Yeah.
Or give you yet another example. You go to the airport and they cancel your flight. Mm-hmm. So most people say, start focusing on the consequences, right? Oh, now I'm going to be late for my appointment tomorrow morning, blah, blah. Yeah, but you cannot do anything about that, right? Mm-hmm. What you can do is to get on your airline's app and immediately reschedule your flight. Right. That's what you can do. Mm-hmm. That's what you should be focusing on. And once you've done that, instead of just start getting upset about the fact that now you're 6 hours late or something like that, just relax, go to the bar, have a drink, and start reading a book, you know, catch up with work, do whatever it is that it's actually useful, as opposed to brooding about the stuff or getting upset or getting angry, you know. I've seen a lot, I travel a lot, and I've seen a lot of people who get really angry at the agent behind the desk.
Because they're forced.
So they're not doing
it's not their fault, and they can't do anything about it. So all you're doing is to take your rage on a human being, which it's a non-stoic thing to do, first of all, because you're not treating that person justly. Right? You're not treating them with respect and all that sort of stuff, right? So that, number one, you should never do that in the first place. But it's also useless because, look, that person doesn't want anything other than get the people out of there. That's his job. He doesn't want to have to deal with that kind of thing. So it's not like he's doing it on purpose.
Right. Mm-hmm, definitely. But yeah, I think this was a really excellent conversation. Yeah. Very educational. I appreciate you coming out here. That was episode 7 of How It Happened. Everyone check out Massimo Pigliucci. You have anything you want to plug?
My Substack, it's called Fix in Winter. That's where you find most of my writings.
Okay.
That's like your blog?
Yeah, it's basically.
Got you. So check
blog,
that out.
podcast, etc.
Instagram, we'll put it in there.
Yeah, we'll plug it. Yeah, we just want to say thank you for tuning in. Thank you to Massimo once again. And we'll see you on the next one.
Like, comment, subscribe. Thank you.